What is up? My name is Layla Hormozi. I'm co-CEO of Acquisition.com, which is a business that does about 85 million per year in revenue. And I don't do coaching or masterminds or courses, and I don't sell anything. And so I make these videos just to share them to help people. Part of our mission at Acquisition.com is to give away as much free information as possible so that people don't have to spend $50,000, $100,000 on masterminds and courses and coaching just to get better at their business. And so this video is part 3 in a series of how to really propel your business, really scale your business to 30 or 50 million. And what are the foundations that need to put in place. And this is the third piece of that, and it's communication. And I'm really breaking down this video. I try to really share everything I know about this and everything I've learned over the years that is stuff I just kind of came to on my own. And I think there's a lot of stuff on the internet that honestly is just really foo-foo and vague, and I hate it. And so I want to put something out there that's actually tactical that you can implement into your business. And so by the end of that video, you should be able to actually have a couple takeaways of things you can do to improve your business, your team, and ultimately your life. And so let me know what you think in the comments and enjoy the video. All right, so in this video, what we are going to talk about is communication. So one of the most vague and complex and seemingly from the outside boring topics that we could talk about in terms of management. And so again, this is the third part of the high output management practices. This is part 3 of 5. I really want to try and break this down for everyone today into a way that you can understand how you tactically improve communication in your company. Because what I have hated over the years is that every person, every coach, every mentor, for the most part, that I have had has said, better communication, you need good communication. And then it's like, well, how the fuck do you do that? And I think that it's this really elusive, vague topic that people don't understand and they can't define, and therefore they cannot improve. In order to improve communication in a company and even understand it, we have to define it, right? And so first off, the definition of communication that we're going to use in this training today is that good communication within a company is a combination of trading assumptions for curiosity and actively listening to others on the team. And so that is the root of what our understanding of communication is. Now, what does that do for people, right? What is the outcome of that? Good communication is a bridge between confusion and clarity. Okay, so somebody is confused. If you're able to effectively communicate with them, everything becomes clear. And so if you can think about if you've signed up with a mentor or you've gone through a course, or it's like you're stuck, you're confused, you don't know what to do, and then that person communicates to you in a way that conveys what you need to do to solve your problem, and all of a sudden you have clarity and you can move faster. And the reason we want clarity and not confusion is because employees and teammates that are confused and clients do not move quickly. Right? And so you've probably seen it. Even if a good example of this is people that don't have a good onboarding practice in their business, right? So like a client comes in, it's just like a big fucking chaotic mess. That client doesn't do anything. They stall. They're not fast. The reason for that is that there's not clear communication about what needs to happen for that client. And so you see a lot of people, if you just insert an onboarding process that is clearly communicated, those clients will succeed much faster. And so to illustrate the importance of communication and how much it can truly affect your company and your clients, think about this, right? Sparta did not have a word for freedom. There was no word for freedom in Sparta. And the reason for that was slavery was so pervasive that they just didn't have a word for it. And so if you think about the things that you say and the things you don't say to your team and to your clients, create the culture, just like they did in Sparta. Again, like with any presentation I want to give you, why should you give your time today? Why should you even pay attention to this? There's a million things out there, right? Okay, well, I want you to understand this, is that nobody ever quits a job or a company because someone over-communicated. The first time I heard that, I think it was 6 years ago. I just remember somebody said to me, and I wish I knew who it was, nobody is ever going to quit because you over-communicate, Layla. And I was like, fuck. That's so true. If you really think about it, right? If you over-communicate, there's no risk. There's no risk to over-communicating. There's a risk to under-communicating. You think about it with your clients, right? No client ever leaves a company because the company over-communicates or is overly transparent. I know for me, right, when I sign up for a program or a mentorship or a course, in the past when I've done those things, when I sign up and people immediately communicate with me and they tell me what's going on and they update me on the company and they update me on who they're hiring and internal things as well as external things and what's coming for the clients, I'm super happy about it. And that the communication is how I perceive that company. I perceive them by how they communicate. Whether they're great or not, the fact that they have great communication, I automatically, they jump rungs in my mind, right? And so that's how people perceive people as well. And then lastly, is just to really cement this in, is think about this. No spouse ever leaves a marriage because the other spouse over communicates, right? Oh, you're just over communicating with me. But you hear people all the time are they stonewall, they're too cold to me, they don't talk to me. And it's funny because these things always trickle down. It's like a lot of times when someone's a terrible communicator within their personal lives, they're also a terrible communicator at work. Now, there are exceptions to this, but more than often not. And so really want to convey is that if you're a CEO or if you're a leader, either one of those, it's your job to set the tone for what communication is, right? Like you get to set the tone for what is expected and what is normal. You see a lot of companies, there's certain companies that all they do is Slack. They don't even use meetings. And then you see companies that they really only have meetings. They don't use email or Slack. And so that's really up to the CEO. And the question really is, why is that so important? And why is it so important that a CEO have good communication, right? Because I think a lot of times we think, oh, well, like the team below me needs to be communicating better, but my communication is good. And the reality is that the way that others perceive you from how you communicate is directly correlated to how much others like and trust you. So if you remember what I said, when I signed up for like a mentorship or a course, I perceive how good the company is by how well they communicate with me. Your employees, your team perceives how good you are by how well you communicate to them. And therefore, how good your communication is dictates how much they like and trust you. And if people like and trust you, your business will do well. And if they don't, it will not. Do you guys get this? Like when I understood this and when I finally it clicked for me, I was like, fuck, it doesn't matter if I think I'm good at communicating. All that matters is how they perceive my communication. And so generally speaking, right, in order for us to be effective leaders, we kind of have to be liked and trusted. And so what I want to break down is first, what are the 3 archetypes, right? I see 3 types of CEOs. And guys, this is something I see often in like when we're evaluating a portfolio company, when we're interviewing somebody to see if we want to take a stake in their business, etc. I get to see a lot of this. And so these are the 3 archetypes that I typically label people as. Okay. And I myself will identify as one as well. So the first one is Sally, who says nothing, right? So Sally really says nothing. She doesn't talk much. She only responds when absolutely necessary, right? She's not proactive. She doesn't reach out to other people, other departments, anyone that doesn't report to her. Why would she talk to them? There's other people to manage them. She fears friction and confrontation. So a lot of the reason that she doesn't reach out to people or communicate with other people is because she's afraid. She doesn't want to have a conflict, an argument, etc., because she doesn't like that. It makes her feel uncomfortable, right? It makes most people feel uncomfortable. And she likes to use the word introverted. She's like, well, I'm just introverted. That's why I can't talk to people as much. Bullshit. And she avoids meetings and one-on-ones because of this. And I kid you not, I have met a lot of CEOs like this. They're like, I don't do the meetings and one-on-ones. Like, I'm not good at that stuff, so I delegate that. And I'm like, good luck. Second is Tony, who's terrible. Okay, so Tony takes over 24 hours to respond to a Slack message. And everyone's like, fucking Tony. Tony doesn't respond to shit. What's he doing? Right? But then when something is very important, he's very fast on Slack and he will talk in all caps because it's very, very super important. He's also vague as hell. So he'll be like, can you finish that project for me? People are like, what project? He's like, the one for IT. What one for IT? This one. What do you want me to do? Finish it. Right? A lot of one-word answers. And he really likes meetings and one-on-ones, but only so that he can yell and blame other people. Or at least that's how his communication style is. And then lastly, there's Evie, who is actually effective, right? Evie always responds immediately. Right? So she sets the tone for the fact that we're going to be fast communicators in this company. She always reaches out for help. She's like, hey, can you help me out with this? Hey, could you help me do this? Hey, this is really like slamming my plate right now. I need to give part of this to you. She encourages and provides insight. So she's like, hey, good job on that part of the project. Hey, wish we could tweak this over here. Always providing insight, maybe to her decision making. So, hey, I want to let you know we're doing X, Y, and Z because of this information that I have and that you don't. So I'm going to share it with you. She gives thorough, detailed responses. So she always thinks, when you are talking to your team, you want to be educating your team, thinking there should be no knowledge in my brain that is not in their brain. As if they don't have the same knowledge as me, how would they be able to reasonably come to the same conclusions and make quality decisions like I can? You can't expect them to, right? So you have to be able to relay that information. And then lastly, she listens and contributes in meetings, right? So she's proactive. She reaches out to other departments. She talks to them. And then in the meetings, she provides insight and she listens. And thinking about that, which one would you like and trust? I think we can all say we know who we would like and trust. Evie, right? Because Evie is actually effective. And the thing is, guys, is that everyone kind of has an archetype that they fall into. And a lot of times it has to take you really taking an objective look at yourself and admitting this is the one that I fall into. Now, I can tell you that when we first started our first company gym launch, my natural inclination is to go to like Sally says nothing. Avoidance, don't talk to people. I actually don't like texting. I don't like communicating with people all the time. Like if I have friends, I don't really text them a ton. That's just like not how I like to communicate. I would prefer to be in person or talk on the phone, right? And so when we first started the company, I didn't even realize that people were perceiving me as, intimidating or scary or maybe even bitchy because I just didn't communicate enough. And so it took a lot of self-reflection to realize I need to take, nobody is born with good or bad communication. I also, by the way, used to identify as an introvert. Nobody is born an introvert or extrovert. You get to train yourself to be good at communication and to be extroverted and to be somebody who verbally communicates things. And so I made it a goal of mine that I could be an effective communicator. And so I hope that after this presentation, you can understand that maybe if you're not a good communicator, maybe if you feel like, yeah, I am vague and I am short and all these things, maybe you can figure out how to be better at communicating and teach your team to be better at communicating from what I'm going to break down next. So the question is really this, right? Because you're thinking, Layla, okay, I get what you're saying. I feel this, like I'm not the best communicator, or I could be better, right? And I want to be able to at least teach people on my team how to be better. What is it that makes Evie such a good communicator? Because we can talk about communication, but like I said, defining good communication is what really matters, because we can't define it. We cannot take action on it. So I want to break this down. There was an MIT study done that Harvard Business Review broke down, and I think this is about 5 years ago. And the study essentially it was, I want to say about 30 different businesses, and it took the teams in each of those businesses, the leadership teams specifically. It put little badges on them. Those badges indicated when they had a touch point with somebody in the company. It could be email, Slack, text, in-person, hug, high five, any kind of communication at all. So they wanted to see how communication would affect team performance. So what they found out is that the teams that were successful had 3 aspects of communication that made them successful. They had energy, they had engagement, and they had exploration. And when I say successful, these companies had higher revenue, higher growth, and were more profitable. So I'm not just saying like this is some hullabulla, whatever, bullshit, roddy, soft success. Like this is like hard numbers, better metrics, better business because of communication. Now, on the other hand, the businesses that did not have energy, engagement, exploration had worse numbers. They were less profitable, they had less growth, and then they had basically every other metric fell in the same way. So what this led them to conclude, the thesis, is that communication itself was a greater predictor of success than individual intelligence or skill level of the team. Isn't that crazy? Like, it's funny, I still get chills listening to this, and really thinking about it, because I remember when I first heard this, I was like, we had just started Gym Launch, and I was like, I have a fucking chance. And I was like, I'm not like the smartest, I don't know the most, I don't have the most experience, I don't have the most skills. I was like, but I can learn to fucking communicate. And so can you. That's the beauty of it. It's a skill that we can all learn. Let's break down what those elements of communication are, because I'm sure you're like, energy, exploration, engagement, what the fuck does that mean, Leland, right? Okay, we're gonna talk about that. So energy is the number of exchanges that you have, verbal and nonverbal. So this could be Instagram, DMs, liking people's photos that you work with, like as much as that. It can be high-fiving someone in the office. It can be Slack messages. It can be text messages. It could be Facebook, like just liking their photos that they post on Facebook. So this is the energy you have amongst the team. So energy can be increased by the volume of interactions. More engagement on Instagram, more on Facebook, more talking on Slack, more texting, more high fives. That's how you increase energy. The second is engagement. Okay, and so engagement is the distribution of energy, right? So say we have A, B, and C. The engagement, right, which is also linked to energy, which is the distribution of energy, is essentially the average amount of energy between A and B, A and C, and B and C. Okay, so you think about, I'll give you an example of this. So Alex, myself, and Suzanne are the 3 executives in acquisition.com. So we could represent A, B, and C. And so how we communicate and how much the 3 of us each communicate makes up how good our decisions are going to turn out, right? Because part of that study actually concluded that better decisions are made with more parties involved, right? So the more the leadership team communicated, the more engagement there was in the leadership team, the better decisions were made. And so I am very cognizant that when I'm talking to Alex, because we live together, that I actually try to talk to him less and talk to Suzanne more because we don't live together. So I try to, my intention with Alex is to communicate less. My intention with Suzanne is to communicate more, because what you want is an even distribution of communication. So if you think about your leadership team you have right now, or say you're running a sales team or a customer success team, it's not, there's the 2 people who talk all the time and 5 others. What you want to think is, how do I get those 2 people to listen more, talk less? And how do I get those 5 others to talk more? And how do I get all of them to interact more together? Because that is what makes the energy higher. And so it's really fascinating to me, because I've literally seen this affect my company in so many ways. When I've explained these concepts to people and they're like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, hey, you are one that you don't talk, you don't speak up. You are contributing to low engagement. And then you take over on all the calls and don't allow other people to speak up. We need you to talk less, right? Once your team gets this, they're like, oh shit, I understand how I can create a better environment of communication for our whole team, because it's a team effort. And then third is emotional control. Okay, emotional control is simply how well we can manage and control our emotions, or more precisely, our reactions to our emotions, right? And so it's really just like about learning to stay calm when you're handling communication issues. Okay. So you want to respond versus react. And this is a simple one, but if you don't have this, you don't communicate well. And so a lot of the times when people are communicating, they're just simply reacting very quickly and animalistically to what other people have said to them on the team, right? They're like, well, I feel angry, so I said that. You can feel angry and come off calm. Or they're like, well, that really upset me. I was offended. I thought that they meant that they didn't think I worked much. It's like, well, what if instead of your first reaction is that you just emotionally vomit all over them by saying that, they are mean to you, is that you say, maybe they meant something different. I should ask a question. And so this is one that I think takes a lot of training on teams, but as a leader, we really set the tone for this, right? And so I can tell you that for the first 6 months of leading meetings and one-on-ones and really putting into place all the operational practices to really scale a business, I had a little sticky note on my computer and it just said, remain neutral. And the reason I had that sticky note there was because I felt like there were so many things happening all the time and there was so much shit going on and there were so many people that were saying things that I hadn't really built the culture yet. So it was like molding the culture. There's lots of people that are saying things that you're like, that doesn't jive with our culture. And like, you're doing something I don't like you doing. And it would always pop up. And I just remember, remain neutral. Like, I can feel angry, but acting like I'm angry in front of the team, that's not going to help anything. That's not going to resolve the situation. And so if you maybe have a hard time with this, I really suggest you just need a reminder. And so I knew I was always on Zoom calls. And so I had to have this little sticky note in the corner of my computer that said, just remain neutral. Like, there's nothing bad that can happen if I don't react emotionally in the first 5 minutes of finding something out. There's no downside to that. So delaying your response, there's nothing wrong with that. There's literally nothing bad that would ever happen. So that's emotional control. And then lastly, in terms of good elements of communication, there's exploration, okay? And so exploration is a really interesting one. It's the communication of teammates engaging outside of their core teams. Okay. And so what you see a lot of the times, one of the biggest problems with a team is they get siloed. So it's like, the sales team is super tight knit and they have a really good culture. And then like the finance team has a really good culture and like customer success has a really good culture. But then like they pin each other at the wall and they're like, well, customer success didn't do this and sales didn't do this. And like, it's just a bunch of bullshit and they're pointing fingers at each other. And this is because there's a lack of engagement amongst the leadership team. So the leadership team doesn't get outside their own box often enough. They don't sit on the sales meetings, right? Finance doesn't sit on the sales meetings. They don't sit on the tech meetings. They don't sit on the HR meetings. They don't try to educate themselves about the rest of the business. And so it's really interesting because I've had a lot of leaders ask me, how can I better myself? How can I grow more? How can I better the business? And one of the first things I almost always say is I say you should gain a more holistic view of what the business functions are. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, go sit in the sales meeting and understand how your job impacts sales. And they're like, well, I'm in technology. How would I? It does. Same. It's like, well, I'm in CS. Why would I sit on marketing? It's like, go sit on a marketing. And that is almost always how you can train somebody to be a better leader, is encouraging them to collaborate with other teams. And then going with that, if that leader doesn't reach out to other teams and educate themselves, the people under them definitely don't either. And you see this where it's like, somebody who's rolling into customer success has questions, but only goes to their manager and their manager doesn't know, and then their manager has to go to somebody. It's like, why don't you encourage the other teams to also reach out to other teammates in other departments? It's like too often people are like, well, follow the chain of command. And if you have a question, go to your manager. It's like, you should allow them to ask questions of people in other departments. There's nothing wrong with that. It creates a better team environment, better communication, and will drive the innovation of your company. And so if you really look at what is good communication, it is energy times engagement plus emotional control times exploration, right? And so like I said, energy, right, is the volume of interactions. You need that to be multiplied by engagement because you don't want to increase energy without increasing the distribution of energy. So you have to have energy, you have to have the distribution of it, which is engagement, and then you have to add in emotional control. Because if you don't have emotional control, then you could have energy engagement, but it's not necessarily going to be proactive, it's not going to be productive, right? And then outside of that is you want to make sure you're not siloed. And that's why you have to multiply this times the exploration aspect, which means that you are able to, yes, you're able to increase energy and engagement in this team, but then can you expand it so it's this entire team? And so that is what makes up good communication. And this is a formula that I have come up with for myself to think through when there are problems on teams. I literally go to this and I think to myself, what is, which one's lacking? Like, do we not have enough energy, engagement, emotional control, exploration? And I can almost always nail it down to it's one of these aspects that's the reason a team isn't communicating well. And so really what I want to sum this up with is I want to explain how you can actually tactically implement the elements of good communication, right? Because I think a lot of times we think, yes, I understand, I want to do this, but it's like, how the fuck do I actually do that? Like tactically. So I want to share with you really what I put together, which is the 6 C's of good communication in terms of actions you can take to actually implement this. And this is what works for me. It's what I've done in the past. This is what I would suggest doing. So the first one is that you want to call teammates out on meetings. Okay. And so what this is going to do is it's going to increase energy and engagement. What I mean is if you are running a meeting, it is your job as the conductor, as the facilitator of that meeting, to ensure there is proper distributed engagement. Okay. So if there's 5 people who don't talk and 3 people who talk every meeting, every week, tell those 3 people in private, hey, I love that you speak up on the meetings, but I need you to actually listen a little bit more. And I'm going to try and encourage other teammates on the meetings to speak up first. So I would like you to think about, I want to speak last, right? So I tell them, think with that, think, speak last, right? And then I meet with the other people and I say, hey, you're not pulling your weight on these meetings. And I have you on them because I believe your insight is valuable. And I'm really discouraged that you're not speaking up. And I understand it might be uncomfortable. You might feel like a little stressed about doing it, but it's part of your job. And it's something I expect you to do. And it's really going to be detrimental to the team if you don't do it, because you are the advocate for your department. And if you don't advocate for your department, then I don't know what the fuck is going on. And it's not going to be considered in decisions that are made. And that usually gets people to understand. So calling people out on meetings. Remember, if you're running a meeting, you are the facilitator. It is your responsibility. I've taken courses on how to run good meetings. And this is one of the fundamentals, which is you have to understand how to engage everybody on the meeting, right? Which is, what do you do with people that talk more? What do you do with the people that don't talk? The second C is you want to create opportunities for co-creation. And so one thing that builds energy, engagement, exploration, and reduces emotional reactivity is when people have more trust with each other. And how do you form trust with somebody? You create with them. That creates a bond with people on the team. And so there's opportunities that you can literally input into your organization where people can do this. One of these that I can say works really well is if you put in a product innovation or an R&D meeting and you invite multiple people from different teams, and it's literally just a brainstorming session. And it might happen every 2 weeks or once a month, but it's a session where they just get to spitball and talk about ideas of how you can grow the company. And this does 2 things. 1, if you're the owner and the CEO, you get ideas from different people. And then 2, they get to bond with each other on that call. It's fun, it's collaborative, you're in your creative space. You're not in your operational do, execute mode. And this is where people can build a lot of trust with each other. And then what you notice is that the more those people that are on those meetings where they're doing more creation together, often then develop really good communication on the operational execution side. So I've seen this multiple times. There's 4 people in Gym Launch that I can tell you meet and they do like meetings like this. And I've seen how their operational how each of them, because they each lead a department, how their department specifically works so much better together. And because of that, they've actually driven up sales, driven up revenue, reduced churn, just because of meetings like this, right? Because they got the chance to get to know each other, spend time with each other, create something with each other, which then they trust each other, they want to work with each other more, and then they build more things that are more favorable for the business. Third is you want to conduct surveys for input, right? So if you think about engagement and figuring out how to get even distribution from people on the teams. Not everyone is going to be verbal at first. And so one of the ways that I've been able to really pull from people and understand, what they think about different topics, et cetera, how I get them to be more engaged is I survey them, right? And it can be, I don't like anonymous surveys because it's just frustrating because you don't know who said what. And I'm like, well, this is useless now. But surveys that, you as a CEO are the only one that's going to see. And so sending out surveys, you can send out, and if you Google this, pulse surveys, you could send those out weekly, which are just surveys that you could send in like Office Vibe or in, what's another one? Office Vibe's a really good product for that. Just pulse checks with people on the team versus, I like to send out surveys monthly and quarterly in terms of where do you see opportunities for the business? If you were CEO, what would you do? What would you change about the business? I like to ask questions like that. It really boosts engagement and participation in people that typically don't. And what you see is a lot of people who don't talk on meetings, they answer those surveys like a freaking essay. And then fourth is you want to coach your team on how to give feedback, right? And I have a video on how to give feedback, and so I will refer to that video, but essentially coaching your team on how to be a good communicator, right? And so opportunities that I use for this. In Gym Launch, for example, I used to do a leadership training once a month. And so often it would revolve around communication, feedback, etc. Another opportunity that I think was the most impactful is that in our quarterly offsites, one activity that I always put in place is an activity in which I can facilitate feedback amongst the individuals there. So it's essentially a feedback activity in person. And I like doing it in person more because I feel like people's guards are down a little more. They're more trusting. And I think a lot of times, especially like criticism comes off better when it's done in person. And so that is when I like to teach people. So I go through, I teach them the feedback. You guys have seen the feedback framework on my other video. And then I literally give them the script. And then I say, go practice with each other and give each other real-time feedback. And that has made a huge difference in terms of the culture and their ability to communicate with one another. And then fifth is collaboration as a default setting. And so I think what I notice in businesses that are small or they're growing quickly is that oftentimes a lot of the communication is one-to-one and not one-to-many. And what I mean is a lot of times there's a lot of trust with one or two leaders. They're like the go-to people. And what they do is it's like one-off Slack channels, one-off meetings. It's like so much more direct to person rather than one-to-many, right? Like not held on the weekly meetings or on weekly Slack or on the group Slack channels. It's kind of the same as when a client reaches out to you and they say it's like for a group program that you have, right? And they say, I have a question about blah, blah, blah. And you're like, how about you ask that on the group call? Because I would like the rest of the group to hear that question too, because it's a great question. The same goes for when you have a team. It's like when people come to you and they ask you questions, you're like, hey, let's ask that with the group because I want to get their input on the answer as well. And the more collaborative you can be and the more you can encourage people to ask questions in front of other peers, the stronger your culture will be because your communication is going to be that much better. And then lastly is really just casual activities. And again, this is different based on what kind of company you have. We always try to put some things like this in virtually, which there's lots of like virtual competitions and activities you can do together. But in person, something that we always make a concentrated effort to do is put together activities at night for after we do our quarterlies. So when we have our quarterlies in person, after we finish and it's like, dinner time, etc., or even after dinner, we host some kind of activity. Sometimes we'll have a comedian come and they basically pick on all of us and we all get to pick on each other and it's fun and light. Sometimes we have like a murder mystery, where somebody we're each character and we have to find out who killed somebody. We'll go axe throwing, we'll go top golf. There's activities. And I know that this is something that people repeat all the time, but that's when people have the side conversations. And what I really like about those casual activities is that that's when I see so many of the ideas generated. It's in that off-time conversation. It's like the water cooler chat, especially if you're a remote company, you don't have much time for that. In those casual activities, that's when I see people the most having those and generating those one-off ideas. And so this is almost every time we have a meetup, it seems like the best ideas and the best friendships are formed during those times. And so like with the last two presentations that I made, I want you guys to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. And 1, again, is like abysmal, terrible, doesn't exist. I'm a horrible communicator and I'm ashamed of myself. 10 is like, again, why am I watching you, lady? I'm done. Thumbs down on the video. And so I think rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. And then what I would do is I would take the communication framework or formula and I would look at it and then I would observe your team over the next week. And I would ask myself, where are we missing the most? And then I would look at those 6 C's and say, what one thing can I do that would make the biggest impact on the communication we have? And so I hope this video is useful for you guys. I know that communication is like this vague, boring, whatever topic, but it's really fucking important. And it's honestly the end all be all for everything because you can have expectations and you can, drive accountability and do all those things, but those all stem from having good communication skills. And so with that, I hope you have a great Thursday, Wednesday, Saturday night, Sunday. I will see you on the next one.